All right. Good afternoon and welcome to the Venus Mystery Series. I'm your host, Wednesday Alexander Palacios. And here I am holding my new book, Venus with Her Head in the Clouds. And I'm listening to Bach's flute sonatas because I was in a rush and I couldn't think of anything else at the time. I'm trying to simultaneously broadcast with my Facebook. Figured out I didn't know how to do that because, I don't know how to do that. So I'm going to just record that. Bring you guys a little closer. All right. The last time I was reading from chapter 1, and I'll begin where Venus was trying to figure out who was involved with the murder of her life companion, Jill Abraham. In front of the Santa Monica police station, I found Pepper and Sylvia sitting on the grass by the flagpoles, eating tuna sandwiches that Sylvia had brought from a vending machine in the police station canteen. "Wow," I joked. "You are a good cook, Sylvia." She waved a hand and said, "Oh, Pooh, it's too hot to cook, and how would I heat up anything at work?" Pepper pulled another one from a brown paper bag. "Want one?" I shook my head. "What I want is answers. Got any?" "Well," said Sylvia, "I can tell you what I found out so far. They don't have any suspects, but they always look at the family first, including you, Venus." I gasped. "Me?" Sylvia nodded her head slowly, nibbling on her sandwich. There was a deep silence among us. Finally, Sylvia added, "The problem is they have no gun. They just got search warrants for your house, the Abrahams' apartment, the soup bowl. They already searched Jill's place from ceiling to baseboards. Don't be surprised if Pepper and I are next." Pepper looked first pissed, then sad. I was wondering what was on her mind when she reached out and held Sylvia's hand. "You were right, baby. We shouldn't live together. People ain't ready for us. It's bad enough that they will figure out that we're lovers. You could lose your job." Sylvia shrugged. "I'm a file clerk, honey. A civilian, not a cop. I doubt they will do anything except give me a hard time." And she squeezed Pepper's hand lovingly. A lump came in my throat. I really missed Jill. She always gave my hand the same sweet, loving squeeze. That long, curly blonde hair, those big, beautiful eyes. Nothing in the world mattered as long as we had each other. And now we didn't. I cried again. My friends put their arms around me, right there on the lawn of the police department. I had to let it out. I couldn't pretend to be strong forever, but I knew I would have to be strong. I looked down at my watch, a Snoopy watch with him playing tennis. The ball was on the second hand, and Jill gave it to me because I read the Peanuts comic strips over herbal tea every morning, and I loved Snoopy, secretly. I sighed. "I gotta go," I explained. "I ought to check in on Clarissa, and I promised Mr. Fendall at the Blind Center that I would read to them. Maybe I should keep going, doing the things I do normally, so I don't have time to think." "Well, while you're doing your routine, remember that everyone you two came in contact with, especially together, is a potential suspect," instructed Sylvia, adding, "I listen sometimes when the cops are talking." "Yeah, that's what I'll do," I said, brushing the grass from my legs and butt. I waved goodbye and I skated away, thinking how this could give the cops someone else to think about other than us, and widen the list of suspects. I could always call Clarissa from the Blind Center on Main Street. The Blind Center was just a storefront with a front room with long tables and chairs, and the back room with stacks of books in Braille, a makeshift office, and a tiny kitchen with a coffee maker, sink, stove, and refrigerator. The sink and a back door leading to the rear parking lot. I went to the bathroom next to the office, took off my skates, washed my feet, and put on my Dutch wooden clogs. This way, the listeners always knew it was me. The thought of them identifying me that way actually made me smile. Daylight saving time made the sun set later in the day, and the sun shone brightly through the windows behind my 3 rows of listeners at the Blind Center on Ocean Avenue and Wynwood Way. Mr. Findall was handing out small cups of coffee to the listeners at the long tables. I opened the book to the page where I had left off the last time and began reading from The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. The listeners ranged in age from 20 to 75, but they all listened with the same rapt attention. It was easy volunteer work, and the book was almost as fascinating as Tender is the Night. Tender is the Night was my favorite, and I couldn't wait to read it next. Aside from the occasional cough or throat clearing, the room was silent, except for my voice. Mr. Findall was a short, stocky black man whose life work was helping the blind. I never knew why he chose his line of work, because he never discussed his personal life. Reading to the blind was one of the few things I did without my girl Jill. She usually took that time to go to the thrift store and shop, or cover at the soup bowl. I paused to smile at the memory of her looking at me, cocking her head to one side as her dimple exposed itself, saying, "You are a saint, Venus." I sighed and continued reading until the hour was up. I closed the book with satisfaction and positioned myself by the door to shake everyone's hand as they left. I looked up to see Detectives Crown and Brownlee pulling up to the curb. All of my happiness vanished as they got out of their beat-up, unmarked car. Findall shook his head and started gathering cups, heading for the kitchen. He was not fond of the cops. By the time the 2 detectives got out of the car, Findall was in the kitchen washing cups, singing softly, "By the time I get to Phoenix." They strolled up to me, Brownlee saying, "You are quite a figure in the community, Miss St. John. Everyone knew you would be here." My eyebrows rose. "Everyone?" "We ask around," Crown explained. Perfect, I thought, and I sighed and I asked, "Any news about Jill?" Detective Brownlee patted the top of his perfect afro and replied, "There is something." "What was the exact nature of your relationship with Jill?" I cocked my head to one side. "I already told you. We grew up together. We were very close. We shared everything." Detective Crown seemed to snap with frustration. "Really? Did you share a bed together?" My mouth popped open in surprise. "Who told you that?" "I'm not at liberty to say, miss, but a jealous lover is a big motive for murder, don't you think?" he suggested. Detective Brownlee looked away, clenching his jaw, apparently embarrassed. Not as embarrassed as I was, listening to Mr. Findall singing softly in the background. I knew he was listening to our conversation. I was not embarrassed that I was a lesbian, but I was embarrassed that my privacy had been infiltrated. Those moments when only we knew about our love, when we smiled our secret smile, and we lay next to each other, and we were watching the late night television. Nobody knew, and there was something hot, sexy, and personal about it. My cheeks burned. I tried to stay cool, saying, "I have no one to be jealous of. We were very close." Detective Crown looked impatient. "Really? I heard the cook at the restaurant had the hots for her." "Big Bobby? The surfer?" I almost laughed. "Why should I be jealous? She was my girl." But he was teaching her to surf better, interjected Detective Brownlee. And maybe he was teaching her a little more than that. My breath quickened. Who told you that? I demanded. Who was it? They forgot to mention we trusted each other. We just stood there looking at each other, the two detectives and I. I shook my head and I walked away. I went to the back of the center and changed into my shoes. Afterwards, I walked through the maze of ever-narrowing Venice back streets until I was home. The air was hot and still, with no wind blowing in off of the Pacific, and by the time I curled up in bed, I was sobbing. My friends were right. I had become the number one suspect in the murder of my lover, Jill Abraham. By the time morning had come, I was up at the soup bowl, sweeping, mopping, and scrubbing away my blues. The restaurant was just one big room with a jukebox at one end, 12 tables in the center, and a dance floor and a stage at the other end. I liked that the place had that health food store smell. I heard a sound, whirled around, and found myself watching Surfer Bobby come in the door. His cheeks were red, his eyes were bloodshot, and his hair was tossed. I thought you would be catching an early morning wave, I said, for lack of anything better to say. Not today. Early morning interrogation, he muttered. I sighed heavily. Sorry. Not your fault. But Perry Mason didn't show up to help me either, he said with a mournful tone. What are you doing here? I asked, leaning against a rusty old string mop. Nothing better to do, I guess, he replied and yawned. How are you holding up? Dude, her parents must be freaking out. Yesterday I wrote her name on my board and hit the waves at Topanga in her honor. You know, that's how I got pulled in for questioning. They even called me a stalker and said I was upset because you and Jill were lovers. I told them to kiss off because you and Jill could have any man you wanted. And then he did something I never would have expected. He started to blubber. He just dissolved into tears, plopped down on a stool at the counter, and drenched his hands. I realized I had misjudged him and dropped the mop and rushed across the room. I knew that he was not the killer, not unless he missed his calling as an Academy Award-winning actor. We wept together until we were spent and pulled away exhausted. I looked at him and I shook my head. They think I killed Jill, I told him. And I shook my head again, staring quietly into space. And then I realized Bobby was staring at me hard. It ain't my business, you know. And you guys are like sisters to me. And if you loved her, well, then why would you kill her? The most beautiful girls in Venice Beach who only hang out with each other? What the hell? His voice trailed away and he dragged himself wearily into the kitchen, banging pots and pans until he finally dragged a large bag of potatoes from the pantry, plopped down in a battered chair, and started peeling with a combination of anger and speed. I didn't quite know what he was trying to say, but whatever he meant, he was furious about it. I washed the menu blackboard and stood leaning against the sign, waiting for it to dry. The marine layer had burned off, and the sun was starting to shimmer on the water. I could still see Jill walking out of the water, dragging her big orange surfboard, wearing her skimpy yellow bikini, her curly blonde hair dripping and her body glistening as she waved to me. I squeezed my eyes shut, and when I opened them, her vision was gone and the board was dry. I wrote, Jill's carrot stew, house salad, fresh squeezed lemonade, Bobby's fresh baked bread. I went back inside and announced to Bobby, the Jill special! He gave it a thumbs up and began his job just as George, our Fijian friend, began his job as busboy, dishwasher, handyman, and waiter. I dragged myself back into the office just as I heard Jimi Hendrix blare from the jukebox. Naturally, my desk was a mess. It faced a window at the beach and I worked on the books for a couple